everything anybody wants to change about agriculture comes down to one common denominator, and that's it, human capital. We need more people farming.
This episode of Voices from the Field is the first of a two-part conversation with organic farming pioneer and founder of the Farmer Veteran Coalition, Michael O'Gorman. For 50 years, Michael has spearheaded some of the country's most influential farming ventures. In this part of the conversation, he and NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist, Mike Lewis, talk about Michael's history and how good planning and record keeping can help farmers cope with rising prices for inputs and supplies. Be sure to come back for the second part of the conversation when the discussion turns to what tomatoes can teach us about choosing new crops and how the current energy situation may help new farmers get into the business. Let's listen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Voices from the Field. This is Mike Lewis with the NCAT Northeast office, and I'm excited today to actually have an agricultural pioneer, not necessarily in age, but but on multiple fronts. Michael O'Gorman. I'm excited to have Michael here with us today to share some of his knowledge on the mathematics of successful vegetable farming. Michael, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk with us today. We've known each other for a long time, so it's great to have the opportunity to work with you in this capacity. And I know that we're here to talk a little bit about the mathematics of farming and some technical stuff, but I think it would be really wonderful if you could just share some of your story about how you got to where you are today and why you started farming.
Thanks, Mike, and great to talk to you. And yes, we've had a long friendship and got to really work together on building this whole movement of veterans in agriculture. Meeting you and your brother early on, and then your connections that brought us to Kentucky and the launching of the Homegrown by Heroes label and the wonderful Arm to Farm project that has been going on since 2009 now. Has just been a real, one of the best things out there for men and women looking at farming. So I'm really thrilled to be connected with that. I started farming in 1970. As a year or so, I was young. Maybe in 1969, I took my only post-high school class, sat in on a class, no credits. But I heard that this woman, Dr. Bargilla Ratiever, who was an Austrian woman and one of the pioneer thinkers behind the organic farming movement, was going to give a class at UC Berkeley. And so I had a job in the Bay Area working for the post office, trying to save up money to farm. And I would go in once a week and listen to her talk and buy all the books by Rodale and wanted to be an organic farmer. The next year, my wife and I became part of a community in Tennessee called The Farm. And it was kind of coming out of the 60s. People were tired of the political divisions. War in Vietnam was raging. A lot of young people were looking for a more simple life. And the whole concept was launched of a back to the land movement. When I started the Farmer Veteran Coalition, I realized that these back to the land movements happen in American history in times of war. My father came home from World War II, and what did he want to do? He wanted to get his extended family and go back to the land. And that's the farm I'm spending my time on right now. So it's a very, everything we do is tied into the history and what's happening around us. I decided, I want to do something that was significant. I want to do something that made the world better. And I also wanted to do something real. I didn't, I was tired of people talking about how the world should be and who should run it and how things should change. And I want to do something that was real, that was based on something that was needed and real life results, and found my love in farming. And it was essentially a love affair that's been going on for 52 years. And if one farm ceased to be the place that I could still be and do that, I moved on, and I moved on a number of times in my life. Sometimes I joke and say I felt like the Forrest Gump of farming because I kind of showed up at a lot of very, very exciting places at that moment. After my time on the farm community, where I got to, at its peak, grow 90% of the food for 1,500 people on a vegan diet within 50 miles of the community. And I don't think that's something that's been repeated anywhere since. And that was very exciting. I went back to the land I was born on, farmed with my brother for 4 years. That's where I'm finding myself right now. Moved down to the San Francisco Bay Area and got 2 farms really close into the San Francisco Bay Area and began what was later recognized as one of the pioneers of the locavore movement, selling to the more high-end restaurants and some of the more innovative retail markets around the San Francisco Bay Area. Did quite well until 2 things happened in 1 year, and that was my well went dry on my primary farm, and the San Francisco, the Loma Prieta earthquake took down the bridge, the Bay Bridge between myself and my principal markets. It was just, that's the kind of stuff that happened. But I had actually, 20 years into it, was good enough to be recognized by someone who came along and said, I hear you're shutting down your farm. Would you like to come work for me? And I'm going to have the first organic farm in Salinas, California. Anybody that follows vegetable production or even read John Steinbeck knows that Salinas is really just the iconic center of vegetable farming in the United States, the iconic and the real center of the country's salad crops and cool weather vegetables because of its year-round climate. So I rode a really fun wave for about 20 years and got to build 3 of the country's largest organic vegetable farms, and really got to farm organically on a scale that no one had done before. And it was new, it was exciting, it was the wind was at our back. I had most of that time owners of the company that were real supportive of my desire to be really good to the people that worked for us, and just got to build these companies from, and expand the organic market. The first one in our salad crops became the first organic SKU for Cisco, the food distributor, and most every supermarket chain in the country. So it was real fun and real cutting edge, and not always looking at something new and different to do. When 9/11 came along and my daughter was there at ground zero and heading into her office directly across the street when the plane hit, and got out fine, but some of the same types of trauma that veterans experience from going to war, combination of abject fear and horror at what they see. And then my son joining the military about a week later, that led, after a number of years, to the concept and the idea of me starting the Farmer Veteran Coalition. And that was my most recent venture, which you were a major part of and still are a major part of. And NCAT is a major partner in that whole important movement. So, more recently, as I stepped down from my position as the director of Farmer Veteran Coalition, I'm now the founder of the Farmer Veteran Coalition, and still very involved in helping raise money for it and keep it going and support and give counsel to any of the veterans that, particularly those that are interested in vegetable production. But I'm also spending my spring and summer for the 3rd year in a row back on that farm that my father and extended family helped get coming out of World War II in Northern California, that my brother has stayed on for the last 50 years and farmed. And I'm helping him out on a beautiful piece of property on the Trinity River, growing 20 acres of fruit and vegetables and greenhouse nursery crops, a business that really exploded during COVID, the demand for people wanting to grow their own vegetables. So that's my history. I'm old enough, well enough to have retired a long time ago. But I love being outside. I love being surrounded by the beauty of it, and I love the tasks, and I just can't get it out of my blood, I guess.
Oh, that's great. And I mean, Michael, I'll say, we're really fortunate too as a farming population that, you didn't retire and you decided to stick around because so we just heard even in your brief introduction, the knowledge that and the things that you've learned along the way with everything that you've been able to accomplish, and then to be someone that is willing to give back as much as you do. So I'm thankful that you're here to talk with us and share your knowledge, because that's one of the most important things we can do. So I appreciate your history, and I appreciate you taking the time and being the type of person that wants to help others after the fact. So one of the things that when we first started talking about this, the idea of us getting together and talking, that I went back and I saw in my notes quite a bit, was you often say or write that farmers should think of farming as a trade, not a business. And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate that on a little bit, because it sounds kind of counterintuitive from a lot of conventional thinking.
Well, it is counter to what a lot of conventional training that's going on, and that's a lot of why I kind of like to say it, just to challenge that thought, because there is a lot of wonderful people, and I'm not devaluing what they're doing. There's wonderful people giving training on cash flow and profit and loss, and managing your money, and making your farm, and marketing, and all the important things that make a farm financially successful, that allow you to farm, and that if you're fortunate enough, allow you to make farming your primary income. So I'm not taking away from all that. I'm just thinking, when I look back at my career, I went into farming without land, without money, and without an education. And historically, this movement that the United States has, and that the veterans have become this major part of right now, to create a new generation of farmers, is new in the United States. It has not happened before. Traditionally, farmers are born into a family that farmed. And over time, over generations, the number of them have been staying in farming is reducing each generation, to the point that there's no longer enough farmers coming out of the families that have historically been farming in the United States. The need for new farmers is paramount. And all the things that we hear about that people want, I'd love to see farming, we need to take better care of our soil. We need regenerative agriculture. We need more biodiversity. We need more local produce. We need to stop relying on imports. Every single we need to use less pesticides. Everything anybody wants to change about agriculture comes down to one common denominator, and that's it: human capital. We need more people farming. And never in, there's a few times in a lifetime, say in a career of mine, going into my 6th decade here, where there's like a mega shift happens. And there's a mega shift that's happened, that started during COVID and is going on now, that creates an opportunity for new farmers like never before. And I think it's important to understand the size and the magnitude of that opportunity. And that's that we were already facing high fuel costs a few years ago. Now fuel's through the roof. We're facing, all the things that since World War II, there's been this giant movement of people moving vegetable production, fruit production to California, because it had 180 days of the warmest days of the year with zero rainfall and irrigation. And it had access to all kinds of labor coming up from south of the border to manage and harvest and plant these crops. So there's this enormous opportunity now because the cost of fuel and the questions and problems in the supply chains, problems, lack of irrigation in California, lack of labor in California, that's creating these opportunities for people. So it's a good time to go into farming. But things change in one's lifetime. And if you go into farming and you're starting out, you may not have that same business and that same farm. And something might happen to you, that farm, that market, the demand for that item. But if you're learning, if you're continually learning, your biggest asset, the most important thing you're ever going to have is your knowledge. And that demand for people who know how to grow things is going to be what can carry you forward for the rest of your life. In my career, I left companies, I managed 6 farms over 40 years and then went on to the Farmer Veteran Coalition. But by the time I left my last couple companies and cell phones had already happened, I had like 5 job offers before I got home. The word went out that Michael's leaving. Let's call him. People were wanting me to come work for them, manage for them. So that was just my experience, is to really focus on your education to how to grow something. And you can take that, whether it's in your own business, a partnership, or someone else is going to come around and hire you and want you to do it with them and for them.
No, it's great. It makes a lot of sense. I was actually hoping you were going to tell me I didn't have to do profit and loss statements anymore, but
NCAT's Soil for Water connects you with farmers, ranchers, and land managers who are discovering practical ways to catch and hold more water in their soils. Find their stories of success, practical tips for soil health, and more at soilforwater.org.
I want to keep us moving here because I know we're prone to getting sidetracked. So I did, as we're supposed to be talking about the mathematics of farming. And I think that, one of the hardest things on my farm lately, and a lot of other farmers I work with, is sort of managing my profitability with everything, changing weekly. The price of a roll of fence just went up $60 and posts went up $6 this week. So I think it would be helpful if you could talk to us a little bit about how you would go about evaluating an enterprise and determining your profits, and talk a little bit about how you use your knowledge to make those decisions about your operation.
When I went to, my last 20 years of farming, I had a specific task. I was hired by owners of 3 companies to do a specific thing. And that was, Michael, we have a market. We want you to produce this product year round in this volume. And then next year, we're going to ask you to do more. And so I had to do everything from finding the land to getting the whole farm set up and equipped, and actually had to manage up to 30 different individual farms to make the greater farm successful. Each farm had to succeed. So we had to understand the costs in vegetable production. The major cost in vegetable production is labor. The vegetables are kind of like the labor intensive side of agriculture, and the larger your farm gets, the more people are needed. And so managing and understanding the cost of labor, the real cost of labor, and then the management of that labor, and later we'll get into the productivity, the efficiency of that labor is really important. But essentially, and then what your product is, how are you going to measure that unit of your product and measure your yield? And the words get interchanged in some farming circles, and some, just like farm equipment gets called different things in some parts of the country, but essentially it's what you're putting out times the cost minus your expenses is your profitability. It's the same in any business. What you put out is your yield. For me in agriculture, ultimately that, a lot of conservative business people, maybe a little more conservative than always looking at the cost. How can I reduce costs? How can I reduce costs? And essentially, depending on the type of operation you have and the type of market you're facing, that is a good thing to do. But I really focused on like the yield, what volume I could be putting out, what volume I could be putting out per acreage, what volume I could be moving per day. You know, how can I add more things? How can I create more with the amount of land and the amount of people I have? Because that's a multiplier. You know, and then a lot of other people focus on the price, but the yield multiplies. You know, it's you know, if you could send out 5 boxes at $10, or you could send out, you know, 3 boxes at 20, but the yields are multipliers. So that, excuse my equation there, but the yield is really where, as a farm manager and as a vegetable producer, that's a lot of where I focus to increase that, to improve your numbers.
So it seems like, you know, and I probably learned this from you in 2012, which makes me always think about how can I get more out of this, you know, one plant. But so it seems like yield is, you know, is critical. So I've seen you before talk about some of the steps that we as producers can take to help us ensure that we get optimum yields and optimal spacing. My rooster's providing the perfect soundtrack. But there are a lot of factors in that. So what are some of the strategies that you use to help ensure you're getting the optimum yield from your plant?
I think that, you know, I like to say there's 5 things that make a plant. So the first thing you want to do is focus on the health of each individual plant. Get a good seed, spend the extra money and get the best varieties, the best yielding varieties. You know, there's a lot of, there's focus for varieties that taste better. And if that's where your market and that's what you're going to get a better price for, focus on those. But if the taste is equal and you're focusing on yield, get the hybrid varieties that are going to produce the best for you. And grow that plant right. Learn what it needs in terms of water, what it needs in terms of sunlight, what it needs in terms of fertility, and maintain a healthy plant. But in terms of your production, you also have to look at how many of those individual plants can I produce in the space I have. And in managing your space as a farm, the most limiting factor people have for producing vegetables is in their land. Your land is your most important asset, and getting the most out of it requires managing that space. And so the concept I like to say is you manage your space so you can get the highest plant population without causing damage to the plant or without reducing the productivity, how quickly you can harvest, how quickly you can weed, and how quickly you could take care of your plants. So learn about plant spacing and having what is the right distance between a plant. If it's too close, you're going to reduce the yield of each individual plant. You're not going to get the proper lighting. You can, in some cases like tomatoes, you can cause more fungal problems by having less airflow. So learning about the proper spacing, learning about the right spacing between the rows that you can manage so that you can get the most plants in the row. And then finally, how can you reutilize that same piece of land more than once in your farming cycle, in your farming season? How can you get more crops on that same piece of ground? How can you get a crop in, out, another one in the same year?
I think in 2012, maybe it was 2011 or 2012, we first met in Pennsylvania. I will not remember the name of the farm or the workshop, but I remember you specifically. One of the things that stuck out to me and made me reach out to you is you were talking a little bit about how you use some lower technology to sort of streamline systems. And I know you do a lot of thinking about how you can streamline production systems. And I know you have your grandma's garden story. So I was hoping maybe we could talk a little bit about streamlining production systems.
Well, that's funny. I told that story back then, but in my 20s, when I was growing food for the community in Tennessee, I had my first venture on going south for the winter to grow winter vegetables. Somebody had come up with the availability of 128 acres in Homestead, Florida, south of Miami, which is the southernmost vegetable producing region in the country. And was really excited about that. And I went down when I was driving down there one day and I saw this sign that said Grandma's Garden, 35 vegetables picked fresh daily. And at first I thought, how is that possible to manage 35 different crops? I know a lot of people do CSAs now and do that and more. And I go, whoa, that would drive me nuts. How do you possibly do that? So I went, and met Grandpa, and who was a little bit behind the production, and realized that, he actually had 5 or 6 types of peppers, and he had 4 or 5 types of squash. And that 35 vegetables was really a handful of vegetables with what I call a product line, where you take peppers and you could grow 50. My brother has maybe 20 types of peppers he grows. But when you grow a pepper, and you could add all that different product lines, you manage it as one single crop. And I really took that concept in my whole farming career. And when I was farming larger scales and I would have an individual farm, I focused on reducing the amount of items, the amount of different crops they had to grow, but extending the amount of variety within that crop. And so I began recommending to be vegetable farmers, and beginning and middle-sized and large vegetable farmers, that, if you look at your season in Kentucky, where you have a very distinct spring and summer and fall, and sometimes I know it jumps around in between, but, essentially you have cool weather crops that you can grow in the spring and again in the fall, and you have your warm weather crops in the summer, and a CSA aside, and a farmer's market or a roadside stand where you want to have everything aside. If you want to sell to restaurants, if you want to sell to, smaller retails or larger retails, focus on maybe 2 crops per season. And that sounds like a blasphemy when everybody wants variety. But if you think of, say, in the spring, you can grow lettuce and potatoes. In the summer, you can grow peppers and squash. In the fall, you can grow brassicas and something else. You may have, in the end of the day, 35 or 40 things you're bringing to market in the season. But you can do it in a way that you're never dealing with more than 2 row spacings. And one of those could be exactly double the other. So your tractors are set up the same way. You're just dealing with either a single or a 2 row at the same time with the same equipment. You got 2 ways to set up your planter, 2 ways to set up your sprayer, 2 ways to set up your cultivators, 2 temperatures to store things at, which is critical. And one can be ambient outside in the shade for your tomatoes, but in a cooler for your other crops. And so you got 2 temperatures to store things at. You can actually pack into only 2 types of boxes, one box both having the same footprint where they stack on top of each other. They're the same number on the pallet, and just you're simplifying your process. But at the same time, for your market, you're creating what a buyer wants, which is a product line. They don't, the buyers have a lot, even a restaurant, they have so many things that they have to bring in to maintain their menu. If you want to sell tomatoes to a market or to a restaurant, you got to be their tomato guy. You got to have their heirlooms. You got to have their main tomatoes, your sauce tomatoes, your cherry tomatoes, grow your tomatoes. That's the concept. And I took that to a large scale. I grew $250 million of vegetables with that concept. And it really helped with the efficiencies and the cost of equipment and the cost of maintaining and producing that box.
So it seems like if you're meticulous in your planning and critical in your thinking, right, in your planning, that's how you're working to manage sort of the profitability on your farm. So in the end, Michael, what I'm hearing you say is that one of the most important things to financial success on your farm, it all comes down to your planning, right? Your planning and your record keeping. So is there something specific that you do or recommend to people to sort of help with that, on-farm decision-making process? I always feel it's difficult for me to help a farmer with their decision-making process if I'm not on the farm, right? I can look at the video, I can look at the photos, but it's very different if you're helping with that strategic planning on the farm. But are there some strategies or experiences or things that producers should be aware of to help with that planning and management process?
Well, you talked about record keeping, Mike, and more, like I said, my focus, my life is spent growing vegetables, so I can't attest to every type of agriculture and what's involved in every type of agriculture. But the larger my farms grew, the more record keeping was demanded of us legally, by, food safety, organic certification, every sort of regulation, the product traceability that a market wants right now, your account, your financial success, your communication with your markets, your people who are selling your produce. If you're not selling it yourself, your communication directly. If you're selling it yourself, your communication with your market, what you're going to have, and importantly, your own education. So record keeping becomes paramount. And the thing you need to do, though, you realize is that you can't spend all your time record keeping. So you need to figure out what it is you're looking at, what it is that you need to record, and how you're going to record that. And I always told, at my companies, as they got bigger and I understood this more, I would make like a T diagram. I would make, like a big T, and I would write on one column, these are all the things we need records for. The sales crew needs records, the accounting crew needs records. I want records to create, a bonus plan, a productivity reward for the farmers, the supervisors, the employees, that incentive pays for people that produce well. I want to understand more about these crops and what they yield and how long they take to grow. All these different things we need records for. And then over here, you figure out just a handful of things that you need to supply all those with the same pieces of information. And then that's what you focus on, and how do you keep those records? And essentially, it comes down to there's two real important things to understand, and they improve your farm, and they focus on those concepts of productivity, how productivity, how much you produce per time, and yield, how much you produce per acre. And those two items are days to harvest. I planted jade green beans on the 10th of May, and they came in on the 4th of July, so this year. So if every time you plant something, you record when it was planted, you record when you first harvest it, and how often you harvest it, the frequency of the harvest, and the duration, the length of the harvest, and what was the yield. Collecting that information over time is going to be the most valuable thing to getting better and better at your planning. That information or understanding not only how long it takes a crop to grow, but what affects that and how that is changed as the season, as the days get longer and as the days get shorter. My job in running big farms was coming up with year-round supplies of things. And so if the company wanted a year-round supply of organic celery, I was having to plant very close together coming into the spring, because then far apart coming into the spring, because as it warmed up, they would get closer and closer, and then close together going into the fall, because as it cooled down, each of those plantings would take longer. So you could start charting and making a graph, an understanding of that change in the day length and the change from different farms. So collecting those really specific pieces of information, in vegetable production, that days to harvest, understanding how long it takes to get something in, how long you're going to harvest it. And then you could start planning to work, in more crops per season. You can start looking at ways to reduce that amount of time that it's in the ground. Well, maybe I'll go with a transplant. It might cost me a little more, but it's going to save that piece of property for a valuable piece of farmland and for a couple more weeks. Or I could, leave the cover crop in longer and come in with it. Or, there's other reasons, I'm going to have better weed control or different things. But you could start making decisions based on those really key pieces of information.
And more importantly, you don't need a degree in Excel, which I don't have, to keep that simple. Those aren't highly technical records to keep.
But Mike, you just keep a notebook, just write it down, write it down each day, what you harvested, write it down each day, what you planted. That's the point. Somebody can come in and put it on Excel at the end of the year, but you've collected that data in real time. You recorded each day what you harvested, how many units, what size unit that was, and what field it came off of. That's absolutely essential. It's required to, you cannot sell to a supermarket without, and now most stores without that. That's your product traceability. But it doesn't have to be anything more than that. If you're just writing that down, over time, someone could come in, your kids will come in and teach you how to use Excel at some point and set it up for you, but collect the information. Don't wait for collecting the information.
We'll end the first part of the conversation right there. Be sure to come back next time to hear the rest. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at atra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATRA Sustainable Agriculture Program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.